The rifle cracked through the mountain air as Patricia Evans steadied her trembling hands against the cabin doorframe. Smoke curled from the barrel while three men lay sprawled in the dirt of her front yard, their cruel laughter silenced forever. Beside her, Richard Carter gripped the wheels of his chair, his weathered face set in grim satisfaction. The woman who had arrived 6 months ago, heavy with child and broken by grief, was gone. In her place stood someone forged by hardship and tempered by necessity. But this moment of reckoning had been building since the day the townsfolk thought they were playing the cruelest joke of all. The wind howled through Copper Ridge like a living thing, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of an early winter. Patricia Evans clutched her worn shawl tighter around her swollen belly as she stood before the ramshackle cabin that was now her inheritance. 6 months pregnant and newly widowed, she had nowhere else to go. Her husband's debts had claimed everything else, leaving only this remote property and whatever cruel surprise waited inside. The townspeople had watched her leave with expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed amusement. Old Mrs. Henderson had whispered something about it being fitting, though Patricia couldn't understand why. The key felt heavy in her palm as she approached the weathered door, each step crunching through the frost-covered leaves. The door creaked open to reveal a man seated in a rough wooden wheelchair, his legs covered by a threadbare blanket. Richard Carter looked up from the book in his lap, his dark eyes meeting hers with a mixture of wariness and resignation. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that spoke of hard work despite his condition. The cabin was surprisingly clean, with neat stacks of firewood and shelves lined with preserved goods. For a long moment, neither spoke. Patricia understood now why the townspeople had smirked. They had given the pregnant widow to the paralyzed mountain man, expecting both to fail, expecting nature to claim what society had already discarded. Richard cleared his throat softly and gestured toward a chair near the fireplace. His voice, when it came, was steady and unexpectedly gentle. The first weeks tested them both in ways neither had anticipated. Patricia struggled with the altitude and the isolation, her pregnancy making even simple tasks exhausting. Richard watched her fumble with the wood stove and the water pump, offering quiet guidance when she would accept it. He had been living alone for 3 years, ever since the mining accident that crushed his legs and ended his old life. The townspeople brought supplies monthly, more out of obligation than kindness, and he had learned to be self-sufficient within the confines of his chair. Patricia's presence changed everything. She brought news of the outside world, but also needs he couldn't meet and vulnerabilities that made his own limitations feel more pronounced. Yet something shifted between them during those cold October nights when they sat by the fire, sharing stories of their former lives. Where viewers are watching from, and whether you believe Patricia and Richard can truly build something together in this harsh wilderness, let us know in the comments. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who need to hear them. Patricia learned that Richard had been a skilled carpenter before his accident, and his hands retained their cunning despite his immobility. He fashioned her a better chair for her aching back and reinforced the cabin's weak points before winter set in fully. She discovered talents she never knew she possessed, becoming adept at hunting small game and preserving food. Her pregnancy progressed steadily, and Richard proved surprisingly knowledgeable about childbirth, having assisted his sister years before. Trust grew slowly between them, built on shared necessity and quiet observations. He never asked about her husband or her past, and she never pressed him about the accident that had changed his life. November brought the first real test of their partnership when an early blizzard trapped them inside for 5 days. Patricia's contractions began on the third night, weeks earlier than expected. With no way to reach the town doctor and the storm showing no signs of abating, Richard became her anchor in the chaos of labor. His steady voice guided her through each wave of pain, his strong hands supporting her when she thought she couldn't continue. The baby, a girl, arrived just before dawn on the 4th day, her cries piercing the howling wind. Patricia wept as she held her daughter, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. Richard sat beside them, his eyes bright with unshed tears, and she realized that somewhere in the darkness and pain, they had become something more than two broken people sharing space. Winter deepened around their small sanctuary, but inside the cabin, Warmth grew in ways that had nothing to do with the fire. Patricia named her daughter Sarah, and Richard carved tiny toys from scraps of wood, his face softening whenever the baby grasped his finger. They developed routines that accommodated both of their limitations, Patricia handling tasks that required mobility, while Richard managed anything within reach of his chair. He taught her to read the weather in the mountain's moods, knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death in this unforgiving place. She learned to see past his disability to the capable man beneath, while he began to believe that perhaps he wasn't as useless as the world had declared him. The townspeople's cruel joke was becoming something neither had dared hope for. Spring's arrival brought unexpected visitors. 3 men rode up to the cabin in early May, their intentions clear from their leering grins and casual cruelty. They had heard about the arrangement, about the widow and the cripple playing house in the mountains. The leader, a man named Kyle Bailey, had been sniffing around Patricia's property for months, waiting for her to fail so he could claim it for the mining rights. He hadn't expected to find her thriving, hadn't expected the fierce protectiveness in Richard's eyes, or the rifle Patricia now carried with practiced ease. The men made crude jokes about their living situation, their words designed to humiliate and intimidate. But Patricia had been forged by months of hardship, and Richard's presence beside her felt like bedrock beneath her feet. The confrontation escalated quickly when Kyle Bailey reached for baby Sarah, claiming he was just having a look at the bastard child. Patricia's rifle was in her hands before he could complete the motion, her voice deadly calm as she ordered him to step back. Richard's wheelchair positioned itself between the men and his family, his own weapon drawn from beneath his blanket. The 3 visitors had expected to find easy victims, people broken by circumstances and ready to surrender. Instead, they found 2 people who had discovered strength in each other, who had built something worth defending in this harsh wilderness. The mountain wind seemed to hold its breath as Patricia's finger tightened on the trigger, her eyes never leaving Kyle Bailey's face. The rifle cracked through the mountain air, and when the smoke cleared, 3 men lay sprawled in the dirt while Patricia Evans stood tall in her doorway, no longer the broken widow who had arrived months ago. Richard Carter wheeled himself beside her, pride evident in every line of his weathered face. They had been thrown together as society's rejects, expected to fail separately and forgotten. Instead, they had forged something unbreakable from their shared struggles, proving that strength comes not from what you can do alone, but from what you're willing to build with someone who believes in your worth. The townspeople had played their cruel joke, but Patricia and Richard had the last laugh. In the vast wilderness of the American West, they had found not just survival, but a family worth fighting for, and a love that no amount of cruelty could diminish.